gonna get started. So, how are we feeling? Feel good? Feel creative? I heard some of y'all went to the museum. Everything's good. Got your curiosity going. So, to start us off, my name is Jennifer Sanderson. I'm going to be moderating this lovely panel today, and this is sort of a two-parter series. First part, and then the second part is going to be next Saturday. Today, we're going to be talking more along on the creativity side of things, particularly the creative process. And what we found in the creative process is that, you know, you can be an artist, you can be a writer, you can be a scientist, but everyone kind of goes through some sort of process where something comes out of nothing, right? And so if you are an artist, if you're even just curious on how those creative ideas happen, today we're going to talk through how those ideas happen, and really they all come from a different place. And so Mosaic, if you're not really familiar with the festival, it's the second year Ridge Road has done this, is really about creativity and how it brings us together. How we really kind of explore each and everyone's ideas, so that we can see everyone's perspective, communicate differently, and really understand each other, so it can just be, you know, a better place, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go kind of in order. We'll start with Ray. I want and just talk a little bit about who you are and sort of your career path and what brings you here today.
Hi, I'm Ray Dooley. I was for 32 or 33 years a professor in dramatic art at UNC and an actor with the Playmakers Repertory Company there and elsewhere. Yes, that's by and large it, and I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you to Matthew and Trey and Jennifer for asking me. So, yes.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Marshall.
Hi, I am Marshall Botvinnik. I'm a director, a playwright. I'm on faculty at UNC Wilmington, as well as on faculty at Elon University, and just an all-around sort of theater generalist.
My name's Trey Davis. I'm the pastor here at Ridge Road, and maybe the least artistic member of the panel, but hoping to bring my own little spin to things here. So.
Hello everyone, I'm Sophia Lemieux. I'm actually the artist up in that little corner back there. I am an artist. I also have a science background. I'm actually working for NCDOT right now. I'm an engineering technician from New York originally, and then came down here and stayed and finished my degrees and stuff. I do a lot of things, dabble in a lot.
So as I said, my name is Jennifer Sanderson. I have worked about 15 years in the graphic design and advertising section of the career. So I've worked on big brands like Coca-Cola or Oshkosh B'gosh, Geico, things like that. But I've also worked on littler brands, probably you've not seen, with On Raleigh and in Atlanta as well. So creativity is something that is near and dear to my heart, but as I have talked to many different people and worked with many different people, creativity means something different to everybody. And so to get a little context, I would like to start off with the first question, which is, what does creativity mean to you? So I'm going to open the floor up. Who wants to start with that?
I don't mind starting.
Okay, let's go, Sophia.
To me, creativity just means getting to express your emotions and your perspective. Really, you know, I think that as humans, we really strive for connectivity, and it's a way for us to, you know, process our emotions and deal with troublesome times and happy times, and to get to share that with people is a really big gift. But I think everybody finds different avenues on how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, creativity and connectivity, huge. And people really, because there's where do you connect? How do you connect with people, right? Anyone else want to go?
For me, and in my chosen medium, I think of creativity primarily as storytelling, and the thing that I'm creating as a theater maker is a story. And so kind of all of my work is geared towards this question of how do I tell the story? What do I need to tell the story? Why am I telling the story? Who is at the center of the story? Who am I telling the story for? And that's really what I think of in the medium of theater is doing, is storytelling or story creation. And that's my kind of creativity.
Declan Donnellan, in his book, The Actor and the Target, has 7 inconvenient questions for the actor. One of them is creativity or curiosity. He advocates for curiosity as opposed to being creative. And what he means by that is that being curious takes us outside of ourselves, where we experience something, we let that in, and then we respond to that external stimulation. So we become more of a conduit than we are, well, I used to talk to my students in terms of we become a conduit instead. I think we may all remember our toaster ovens, and we would have the little coils at the bottom that would glow red hot. That's not what we want to be as creators. We want to be a conduit channeling something from the brain can be seen oversimplification, left side, right side. The right side being the more intuitive dream, accessing dream state, channeling that part of our brain into our work in response to something that we are curious about outside of ourselves. So that's creativity for me.
I love it. I would like to hear your thoughts because I have a feeling it's going to kind of relate.
Storytelling is a big part for me too. I think that's a huge point of emphasis and way of theologizing. So a way of getting in touch with the spiritual end of it all is recognizing the story that runs through it. But when I actually hear the word creativity, the create part is that's a huge thing for me. So it's, and Marshall, you alluded to this a little bit, but the idea of there wasn't something and now there's going to be something. And I'm involved in that in somehow. There's a piece of me that's coming into this, and there's something mysterious about it. There's something confusing about it. But the creating part of the creativity is definitely something that I think about.
How do you deal with the mysterious part?
Very carefully. I mean, sometimes you feel like you don't do it very well.
Sure.
Like you just you're trying to, but it doesn't come out the way you were hoping or whatever. Again, as a pastor, reverently, that's a word I would use, that there's a sense of I am moving into something bigger than I am, and I definitely don't want to screw that up. So, yeah.
So I want to kind of dive into everyone's different types of audiences. So we've got, how would everyone sort of define their audience, and how would you tell your story to each one of them? Marshall, I'm gonna start with you because you directed this play.
I did, yeah. It's interesting, especially in the context of this. And I'm curious to see what I think in a few weeks after we've kind of completed the run. But I do think our audience is going to be very different in the first 2 weekends when we're here, and in the final weekend when we're at the Jewish Community Center in Durham. And it's not as if we've created one kind of production that will work for an audience that we kind of anticipate will come to this space, and a different production that for an audience that we anticipate will come to the Jewish Community Center in Durham. We just created one production. And, you know, I suppose you could say that sort of the universality of the story and the ways in which this text explores things like faith and family and art, that's universal and kind of exists beyond denominational boundaries. But I think at some point, at least for me as a director and an artist, I kind of just get into a space of the story is the story. It's just my job to tell the story. It's not my job to decide what anybody will make of it, or how they will or won't experience it, or craft it and manipulate it in a way so that it's saying one thing to one set of people and something else to a different set of people. I kind of just try to tell the story and get out of the way. In that sense, I really do find myself to be an artist who thinks more about the story and less about the audience, and the composition of the audience. And it's just, I put this thing out into the world, and I hope it is useful and meaningful and enriching to people, but ultimately they get to decide how it does and doesn't resonate. I try not to control that process or manipulate that too much.
When you're for either one of you, when you're directing or doing theater, is there and actually I'm super curious about your answer for this too. Where does listening come in?
Sure. Well, as you know, I'm an actor, and as actors, we are there to serve the, first of all, the play in the playwright's vision, as it is then interpreted through the director. And we have different kinds of directors who have stronger or less firm ideas of how it wants to go. But in terms, Trey, of listening, what we do as actors is we put ourselves into imaginary given circumstances and then receive from those circumstances and react. So the more accurately and specifically we can receive from that imaginary world that has been created, the more resonant our work can be, because we are more recognizably human and individual on stage. And counterintuitively, the more specifically human you are, the more universal the experience that the audience has. Oh, I recognize that person. That's a human being. Look what he's going through. Oh, it's like for me. And so listening to the given circumstances and then responding believably within those circumstances.
Yeah, for me, it's also at the center of my work. I think that there is something distinctive about theater, perhaps in contrast to but my sense of theater, in contrast to visual art, and even in contrast to music as well, which, at least for me, as a theater artist, I don't actually see it as a vehicle for self-expression. I'm not trying to tell my story. I mean, unless I were creating a solo piece about my own life, right? It's not an act of self-expression. It's an act of trying to find a way to express other people's experiences. As a director, helping actors figure out how to express what's going on with these characters. As a playwright, it's the same thing for me. I'm not writing autobiography. I'm listening to characters and listening to what I think are the things that they would say, and I think are the things that they would do. And in that sense, it's kind of the opposite of self-expression. It's sort of self-nullification, which in a way is sort of the core of listening, right? I mean, listening is sort of getting out of your own head and hearing what's coming at you from something outside of you. So yeah, I really do think it's at the core of the work. And as an aside, I don't know if this is true or if you actually said it, Ray, but a professor of mine in undergrad who acted with you said that you said one day on about opening night, now is when the listening starts. I don't know if you ever said that, but that has always stuck with me.
Right.
So in my head, it's always, and I even think about that as a director of like, I've got to get the actors into a place by opening night that they are listening to each other and what they're saying to each other. So, did you say it?
I very well might have. It would have come from a friend of mine way back in New York, Frank Dwyer, who we were in a play together, and we had opened the show, I think, like the second performance, and Frank said, "I'm almost ready to open my eyes." and what he meant by that is there's so much there's so much, I'm going to go left brain, right brain again. There's so much left brain of, do I really know the lines? Do I know what's happening, where the state, my blocking, my lines, all of those things that are by rote. Once that is all in place and you can be sure, then the listening starts. Another way of saying the same thing, a useful way of thinking of the brain is like a 24-track tape. And in your rehearsal, if you're still learning the lines, you're using 20 tracks. Just what's the next line? What's the next line? And as we get to opening, we're taking fewer and fewer tracks to remember what the lines of the blocking are and how the shoes are tied and all that. And then that opens up the rest of those tracks for what we might call harmony, the rhythm section, all of those things which are about listening and receiving because I'm secure in what I'm doing in terms of particularly the lines. And that's that sounds like something I would have said. What I meant by that is we've gotten those 24 tracks down to maybe 4 tracks, and now we don't need to be thinking, what's my next line, what's my next line, what's my next line? It's like, what are you saying? Not only what are you saying, but how are you saying it? Oh, it's different than last night, okay. And I know my next line is there. So, thank you. Thank you for remembering that.
I want to bring us back to Sophia and visual arts and your audience, sort of how do you communicate?
Yeah, I feel like it's a very different world. I mean, as you can imagine, like all of my artwork comes from my thoughts, comes from my feelings. That my audience is extremely broad. It really just depends on, the way that I market myself is typically through social media. So it could be friends and family, extended friends and family. It could be some random person that just stumbled across that. I don't know their age, I don't know their ethnicity. So it's interesting to see who really resonates with my pieces and how they resonate. I feel like a lot of my art, I don't paint for other people, I paint for me. I paint as a stress relief and because it's part of my identity, because it's something that I love, and I really want to resonate positivity through my artwork, and I hope that people latch onto that thought process. And I hope that the story that my pieces tell, not only they can connect with the story that I'm telling, but they can also find their own story. And that's why if you look through my pieces back there, a lot of, painters and drawers, they find their little niche that they're really good at and that they really like, and they stay within that niche. And I want to be known for my versatility because on days where I'm feeling really emotional, I'll paint an abstract piece. On days where I want a little more control, I'll paint a realistic piece where I know what I'm painting or I know what I'm drawing, and it's more of it's a little less thought process that goes into it because it's not as raw like emotion.
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting to see you guys' perspective because it's different for everyone. It really is. Yeah.
I'd like to kind of side note into, like I mentioned, I was a graphic designer and artist. I am the complete opposite of audience. I know who my audience is because I have been given the data and the assignment on who to work with. And I also want to really sort of describe the two words. There's design and then there's art. What I have been what I kind of believe is that designing is problem solving in creativity, whereas art is really expressing an emotion coming from you or from someone else or something around you. Art and design really, they kind of mesh together, but I think that's what the difference is that designing is really kind of creating a problem, sort of like you think of architecture design, furniture design, things like that. You're solving sort of that problem that needs to happen. So with graphic design and advertising, first off, it's very gratifying when I can reach that mark, when I've done my research and understand, how do I communicate to this audience? If my audience is 20-somethings who drink soda and go to college, I can go to a concert or something of that same age and walk around and get all that inspiration, and that's what I love, is that I can go through and I can kind of walk through other people's shoes and see it, and then pick it up and design it and put it on a piece of paper. But it's interesting, and I can also kind of say this, I have also kind of lost my emotion a bit. So when does it begin and when does it end on my piece that goes into it? So that kind of spurs into, Trey, you want to add anything on that one? That spurs into what I want to talk about with authenticity. Creativity and authenticity is hard. I think it's something that we have to either dig down emotionally and think about, or so I guess my question to start off on this one is, how do you stay authentic in your creative self? We'll start with Ray.
One of a mentor of mine, a Hungarian director, used to talk about confessional acting. And what he meant by that is that every time an actor gets up to work, whether it's in studio, in performance, in rehearsal, I'll speak of myself, should be confessing something about himself. I would be confessing something about Ray. Not my idea of the way the scene should go, not my idea of what might be funny or romantic or whatever. But the audience should learn something about me. That would be the immediate way into authenticity, is that it's always me there. And again, this goes to the idea that if this is a specific human being, a recognizable human being, the event becomes more universal, counterintuitively. Let me play World Hunger. It's not going to work. I have to play a specific target and respond to that as myself in a recognizably human way, so that the audience feels like, oh, is that him? Or is that Ray, or is that the character? Wow. And then we have something that really people start leaning into. So yes, that.
Yeah, I'll echo, especially you talked a little bit about this, Ray, but the idea of the focus being married in that way. For me, the authenticity comes when the focus is pointed in the right direction, as opposed to getting spread out too far in other places. And often, when I'm doing worship planning or something like that, often I'm thinking about, what will make this engaging for people or memorable or whatever. And those aren't bad questions necessarily, but I have to pull back and get the focus more toward, why are we here in the first place, and let's make sure we do that right.
Mm-hmm.
So that becomes the main thing for me. Let's make sure we do this one thing right, and then we can worry about the rest. But if we're not doing the one thing right, the rest of it won't be true.
And it's so hard to do that, to stop and just do it for this one day, even though for me, it's, I want to say this one message, but there are 100 other messages that I know will also work for other people. But to say it well and to say it right, I have to concentrate on just that one. And then from there, kind of go, okay, that didn't work. Maybe I'll go somewhere else. If it didn't work, let's go somewhere else. But if it is not authentic, we don't concentrate on that one message. Right? Yeah, for sure. Anyone have anything else to add on authenticity?
No, honestly, I think you guys really hit the nail on the head. Like, you know, especially for me, the way that I stay authentic typically is just really honing in on, well, to begin with, a lot of my abstract pieces come from just thoughts when I'm laying in bed, or sometimes I'll have a dream about something and I'll just try and, you know, put that on canvas. So it's easy to stay authentic when it's, you know, something that just pops up in your head, but it's hard in the painting and drawing realm to not be, you know, you ride that close line of paralleling other people's work and their styles and things like that. So the way that I do that is just really kind of focusing back in on my emotions and my creative process, and kind of blocking out all of the other influences.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. How's your creative process changed over the years?
Honestly, I think I have, as I've gotten a lot more experience, you know, during COVID I was doing a lot of portrait work because I studied science, so I wasn't painting a lot during school. I've always been an artist, but so I have those, you know, abilities, but it's kind of ebbed and flowed. Like I was doing a lot of realistic pieces, which was great because it rehoned my skills, but I felt like there was less expression in that. I wasn't getting to tell my own stories. So once I was doing more abstract stuff and doing my own work, I feel like as I've honed my skills, I've also honed my ability to take my thoughts and actually put them on canvas and represent them better. Which, you know, in terms of the process, sometimes I have to kind of make like almost like a blueprint draft of what I want to get to before I start, but sometimes I just have no idea where I want to start and I just start painting. So it just depends, and I love that freedom.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's interesting, my answer to the question actually harkens back to the previous question about audience, and I hadn't necessarily connected the two before we segued into the next question. But for me, and I don't quite think in terms of the word authenticity, I tend to think a little bit more in terms of the word honesty.
Sure.
And I really only ask two questions about anything that I direct or anything that I write, which is it honest and is it specific? And in some ways, the audience really is the arbiter. In theater, the audience really is the arbiter of honesty. And the question really that I'm getting at when I say, is it honest, is when the audience sees this on stage, will they believe that this specific person would say this thing in this way or do this thing in this way? And if they believe in the truth of the fiction, then it's honest. And if it's been done in a way that they'll stop believing in the truth of the fiction, then they're, you know, I mean, I think we're all built in with these sensors that let us know when something is false and untrue. And audiences know when you lie to them. And it's an interesting question too in the context of Asher Lev, because Asher Lev's artistic mentor, the one sort of artistic commandment he gives Asher is do not lie. Do not lie. Do whatever else you want. Do not lie. And that has to be sort of at the core of it. And certainly in the theater, you know, you can feel it from the audience. You can just feel it in the room. The audience knows when you're lying. They know when you're lying.
You might hear the phrase "the truth of the fiction" in a sermon in the next. There's a good chance of that. I'd say.
All right. You're going to cite me though.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. I want positively graphic.
One guy I once heard said.
That brings up a question for me that I'm struggle with it daily in my work is, you brought up, you know, the do not lie. But how do you know when an audience really caught on to the message that you were trying to send? It's like that telephone game, right? Where you say the word and then it comes, the phrase, but then it comes out completely different from the other ears.
So, one time I'm giving a lecture and it goes on for 45 minutes and I feel very good about the messages and I've got my slides and it's going very well. And I got done and a woman came up to me to thank me and tell me how meaningful it was and said that she especially appreciated when I said, and then she said something that was 180 degrees from the entire point of view. And like my jaw dropped a little bit. And I was like, that is, I mean, I didn't know what to say because she was being very nice and complimentary, and at the same time, she totally misunderstood everything from the entire time we spent together. And so I've thought about that question a fair amount. And when I preach, before I go into the sanctuary, I always pray, and what I pray is for the Spirit to translate the words that I speak. And then I trust that whatever people hear is what they really need to hear, even if it isn't what I actually said. And while I find that unsettling, because I trust in a spirit, I believe that that is how it's supposed to work, and that sometimes the Spirit covers up my mistakes, and so that there's something about that that's reassuring, even, you know, that, and humbling certainly. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yep.
It's an interesting question. I mean, obviously, you know, you and your background in marketing and you on the pulpit, those strike me as much more message-driven mediums, whether it's consume this or whether it's live your life in this particular way because it'll be enriching and fulfilling and spiritually nourishing. I'm not a very message-driven artist. For me, the thing that's important isn't so much that someone receives the thing I'm trying to communicate, but that someone continues to live with the experience after it's fleeting, right? And I think theater, especially, is such an ephemeral art form, right? It's there, you see it, it's gone. And at least for me, when I think about the shows that I still think about, including Uncle Vanya from 20 years ago, the shows that I still think about are the ones that made me sit in the theater after that final curtain call, that made me unhappy to have those doors open and go back out, or I'd wake up the next day and it would still be on my mind. And so in turn, those are the things that I hope to facilitate for other people. As opposed to saying, I want you to take X, or I want you to take this Y thing that can be implemented into your life. It's just, I want it to somehow, the memory of this ephemeral experience just somehow just still live on somewhere in your consciousness. And beyond that, that's all that's important to me as an artist.
It facilitates that impact, no matter what kind of impact it was.
Yeah.
But it still kind of resonates. Yeah.
And very briefly, I'll just add to what Marshall said. Particularly as an actor, you don't, the choosing of a message is in the reading of the play ahead of time, and do I want to be part of putting this out into the world? And sometimes the answer is no. And then you say, no, thank you, no, not going to do that. And then, in terms of how do you know, for an actor, you can tell when an audience is really listening because it goes silent. And there's not a lot of futzing around. Trey, you may find this as well. You know, you bring up something and suddenly the whole congregation goes.
Usually, we're trying to get the congregation to be a little more,
Yeah.
less silent.
Well, there's a difference between, you know what I'm saying, though, that moment
Yes.
where it's like
The stillness.
stillness,
Yeah.
and you could hear a pin drop, all those kinds of things. That is probably means you're working well in whatever you're doing.
Not visually.
It's so interesting to hear their perspectives of this, because that's ultimately what it is. It's perspective, right? It's, you could be saying words that you think are so clear, and someone can interpret them completely differently. And it's the same thing in the artistic realm, or like, the painting and drawing realm. Like, even though I draw off of positive emotions when I paint, there have been times where, especially with the abstract pieces, someone looks at it and they say, "This is what I see," and I said, "That's exactly what I was trying to communicate." And then there have been other times where someone says, "I see this in this," and I'm like, "That's great." Not at all what, the thought process that I was going through, but that's the beauty of it. That's, the perspective of it, and the ability to connect with it regardless of the feelings that you feel, I think is really the reason why we do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Tom Stoppard, the great British playwright, tells a wonderful story, very much like this way, where someone comes up and says, "Oh, in Rosencrantz house, this, that, the other," and he likens it to being at the customs line, and the customs agent opens a suitcase and pulls something out, and he says, "Well, I don't remember packing it, but well,
I love it.
And I love to consume art in media that I don't understand. I don't understand visual art at all.
Yeah.
And I don't understand ballet at all. But I love to encounter those two forms or modes of expression, because I can kind of just let it wash over me. It's really kind of the only time I can get out of my analytical mind, because I'm hyper analytical. But because I know so little and intuitively have just zero understanding of the medium, I don't analyze, because I can't. So it's just, do I feel that gravitational pull to this thing, or don't I?
Right.
And that's nice too. To just have that experience. I don't really take anything away from it, but I just had that experience of just letting the work wash over too.
Right.
How do you deal with the feelings of someone not really, what was the word we used? Being impacted the way you feel like it would have been impacted? It's hard.
I feel like I've said it like 8 times today. It's hard. Yep.
I think for me at least, as disappointing as it can be when somebody doesn't resonate with a piece of work, or when they don't quite get the message that you're trying to send, you almost feel a loss, because you put so much effort and for me emotion into these pieces, and you really want people to appreciate it, but at the same time, for me at least, like I said in the beginning, I do it for me first. And so as long as I can appreciate that, I find some resolution.
Right.
But I do take that into consideration, the impact that I have on people, and it makes me look for other avenues in ways that I can not only, stay authentic and communicate the story that I want to tell, but also to allow people to interpret it. And it's hard, like you said, some people don't feel like they have the know-how of looking at a certain piece of artwork and interpreting it the right way, but I think that's for me why I want to connect, because to me there is no right way. It's great if you look at my pieces and you just see colors, and it's great if you see a piece and you see some abstract form that reminds you of this, and it's interesting to try and be that method to help people connect.
Yeah, you're putting yourself out there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it's once it's out there, it's almost like it's not mine anymore. It's It's everybody's. It belongs to everyone.
I was going to say, it's kind of like dating that you said, but then it's not like, it's not mine anymore.
Never
Never mind.
mind.
I'm not gonna say that. Anybody else?
I went to go see Glenn Hansard in concert right after he won an Oscar for, he's a songwriter. And he wrote the song and won an Oscar, and he was playing in this funky little bar in Richmond. And I was very excited. I go to see him, and most of the people were way more interested in drinking than they were in listening to him play. And there was a lot of talking and background noise, and you just see he was kind of getting frustrated. And he was part of a duo at the time, and there was the Czech piano player, and he plays guitar. And she leaned over to him at one point and whispered something, and he kind of nodded, and it seemed to calm him down. And then he came back to the microphone and he said, Marketa reminded me that I can't hear those of you who are listening. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. Like the noise in the room is like, doesn't mean, like there'd be half the people in the room that are really absorbing this and taking it in, or more than half, and but you don't hear the people who are listening. So sometimes I try to remember that, and if there's somebody who's not impacted in the way that I want, usually there are a lot of people who did find it very meaningful, and I just don't know. And
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it.
yeah, he's Irish. He's very smart.
Any thoughts on the acting side?
Well, I was thinking, how does that happen in our world? And two things came to mind. One is if you have a 2-act play and you come back from intermission and a third of the audience has left. So, but that's a clarifier for you. You can ask yourself, is it because the show is bad? Or maybe it's a difficult piece that isn't for everyone. So if you believe in what you're doing, then you fare forward for those people who still are there and who are maybe having an important experience. Not every piece of theater is for everyone. And the other is bad reviews. And then you have to ask yourself, well, does this reviewer actually know anything? And that can handle a lot of that. But if it is someone who really does know something, then you have to say, well, what can I learn from this? If this is the criticism, then, oh, well, maybe I'm doing, let me take that under advisement and see. Not that I'm going to change my performance all that much now, because it's the performance that I've arrived at, but in future, I may keep that in mind going forward. So it's learning. It can be a learning experience.
In advertising, my mentors have always said, it never works out the first time. 90% of the time it won't, unless you're someone who can spend millions and millions of dollars to make sure it all goes right and has dealt with the details the first time. But we are only so many people, and we can only reach so many people at once. So what we learn is we build. We build and build and build off of what we've already built. I like to call it the foundation. I love building off of the foundation, whether it's a brand or an advertising campaign. You won't get it right the first time because you're in your brain. You've made it and done all the research, but you never know until it actually goes out, and then that's when you tweak it. That's when you listen to your audience and kind of figure it out from there. Yep, that was a hard lesson to learn. After you realize you just spent $500,000 to build off of it. Yep. Any words?
No.
So I'm gonna ask one more question, and then I'm gonna pivot it to the audience, see if we've got any questions for you. So what I would love to know a little bit more about your creative process and working with others. And I'll just kind of go straight to the point of, was there a time where you want to share where you had, this wonderful creative process and thoughts, but you had to share it with a team of people, and that went incredibly right or incredibly wrong.
I'll just say that I was so blessed in my career to work with a group of people over at UNC Playmakers, maybe 10 others, and we were together for 30 years. We had births, deaths, marriages, divorces, great successes, some failures, and I'm really interested to hear about the art and the answer for that, because theater is a communal endeavor, and if you're fortunate enough to work with people you both highly respect professionally and really love personally, it's just fantastic, and together you build. I sometimes talk about the cathedrals in the Middle Ages. The city decides to build a cathedral, and the people who start building it know that it's not going to be finished for like 300 years. New York, and St. John the Unfinished in New York, it's still going even. But they build because something is telling them to build, and then the next generation keeps going, and the next generation keeps going. And that's a way that I felt about what we were building at Playmakers, that the people who started back in the 70s started it, and Playmakers is now, 48 years going, I think, something like that. And so to me, that's the best feeling in the world.
I mean, for me, in terms of my personal process, I'm incredibly systematic. I thrive on structure. My rehearsal periods when I direct are always kind of structured the same way. As a writer, I always like to write in the same spot. My noise canceling headphones, put them on. I like to write at the same time of day. The routine of it is what gives me the freedom to then create, because the routine, I think, takes out all of those other distractions, all of that static noise that impedes creativity. In terms of sharing, I'm not sure a specific experience, or just a generalized experience, which is there's experiences where you're in the room with people that you have to tiptoe around, or in one way or another. And being in those rooms where you don't have to tiptoe because there's just trust, and it's taken as a precondition that there is mutual support across the room. And the experiences of tiptoeing are really awful. They're just awful experiences that at least make me question my career choices sometimes. And then when you have the opposite, it can be sort of some of the most fulfilling, life-affirming, community-affirming things you can have. And I really do find a room really either goes one way or the other, at least in the theater, that there's not much middle ground. You're either in that space where people are afraid of each other, or people trust each other, and you have one of those two kinds of spaces.
Yeah, I'll echo the trust-fear conundrum as being the dividing line between the positive and the negative experiences by far. But I would kind of go maybe a slight step further and say that, unfortunately, I feel like I have been in settings where it didn't feel like the group actually wanted to create. That the church sometimes doesn't move forward very well, and so we're like, let's just do it the way we've always done it, and that's not always the best way to. Rarely would that be the best way to create something. And so sometimes there is some trust, but there's not the yearning. What's the line? There's something screaming to get out. So in Asher Lev, there's a line where he says, the mentor says, anyone can draw, art is when there's something
Yeah.
screaming to get out, and that the truly beautiful and magical collaborative creative moments come when there is the trust and there is the shared screaming. And that everybody in the room senses like, we've got to go somewhere, and we're seeing it happen, and we're excited about it and passionate about it. And it doesn't mean that everybody thinks the same, that there's a totally unified vision, but there is a shared passion in that way. And I mean, I imagine that's what Playmakers has been like as well. So.
Yeah, I think the biggest roadblocks that I hit, a lot of times I put up my art in First Friday situations where, I'm in a restaurant, I'm in a salon, and, it's the same thing as this, like, it's a mutually beneficial thing for us to just have all of these things going on, which can be great exposure, but it can also take away from people's ability to just look at my work, to really pay attention to it. And that can be frustrating at times, but it also has taught me to just be flexible and to kind of go with the flow and try new things. And that's just part of the nature of the job. In terms of like the people that I've dealt with, I find that if I'm excited, they're excited, if especially the people that are helping me set up or are collaborating with me to make something or to make an event. We thrive off of each other's positivity, and that's great. The biggest hurdle that can sometimes happen is just getting the word out there, getting people to come and look at it. I was in Sertoma Art Gallery, and that was really my first gallery exhibition. Right as COVID hit, and so I think probably 3 people came, which you can imagine. I don't blame them, but that can be, it can really set you back in your mental state of like how excited you feel and how much effort you put into these things, and it's not for the lack that they didn't like the play or the piece or your thing. It's just that they didn't have the chance to interact with it. So there's frustrations in that, but I find that, as long as I'm positive, nothing can go wrong. Hopefully.
Right.
Yeah.
The New York Times, it's been maybe 2 months ago, had a wonderful article about how to look at art, that the art editor wrote, and basically gave people who have a rough time kind of appreciating visual arts steps on what is you're supposed to do. I guess like there's, because you see people go in and you're like, I don't know how to react. It's okay. You go to talk to the people around you, get new perspectives, and just look, and maybe it'll change your mind, and maybe it won't. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. So I'm going to open it up to the floor. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Well, the question that I had all the way through is, as a person who has had some creative sparks at times, my question is, do you think that creativity is part of being human? Is it part of our human condition? Ooh. And if so, how do you nurture it?
Love that question. Let's go first on that.
So it's interesting you asked that because, we got sent these questions just so that we kind of could brainstorm, and I think one of the first ones where we're defining creativity, that's immediately what I thought of is really that, as humans, we are creative beings where we want to, we originated making things with our hands, and you see, caveman paintings on the wall, that's a form of art, it's a form of expression, and I think that, ultimately my answer of like, we look to tell a story, we look to connect, we look to express ourselves. The way to nurture that, I think the beauty of it is that there's such a vast, way to do that. Even things that maybe some person wouldn't qualify as art, it really does. I don't think that art should be termed as just a painting or a play. I think that art is all around us. I've even as a painter and drawer, even taking a walk with my dogs, I'm thinking, how would I create that color right there in that tree mixing these colors. You know, that's a creative process, even that thought, you know. So I think that our ability to let ourselves feel and to find ways to bring that into the world, that is my definition of creativity and you know, how we as humans are.
Yeah, for sure.
Declan Donnellan says that actors have two tools, essentially the senses, meaning the physical body, and then the imagination. And you can train the body and voice and all that. But the way to train the imagination is to pay attention. That's what he says. Pay attention. And not unlike what Sophia was saying, pay attention to what's out there, and that then feeds the imagination. Yes.
And I would say that the last 3 years, we haven't gotten a lot of out there. We've gotten a lot of in here.
Yeah.
Wherever that is. And the more out there we can go, the more likely our imagination is to be stoked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you think that connects us? Creativity really connects us. Is clear that is. Is that kind of
Yeah,
go with
yeah,
your thing?
it's-
How does it connect us all together?
I mean, I was hearing that, you know, it's creativity as being a communal kind of thing, that it does require creativity on both ends for it to be communal in that sense.
Interesting.
But, you know, when you look at artists who are wonderful at their art, and you think of, you know, kind of the disparity maybe sometimes, that I guess I was hoping to hear the word that, you know, we all have that innate creative ability to be in that communal kind of space with the artist.
So, you know, a couple of thoughts, and I'm glad you brought up caveman, because it connected with how I was going to answer your question. Which, you know, when I teach introduction to theater to college students, we always start before we get into theater specifically as a medium, this broader conversation about what is art. And I always ask my students, I say, imagine when you hop in a time machine and you can transport yourself to the very first instance where a caveman drew something. Okay. Why do you think they did that? What was it that happened inside their brain that made them do that thing? And if you can kind of answer that for yourself, you can kind of get at the root of what you think art is. For me, I think those very first drawings arose out of an impulse to say, I was here, and this is the world that I saw. And for me, that's the bedrock of art. I was here, I lived, and I saw the world. This is how I saw it. And I am now translating it either to a wall, or to a production, or to a film, or to whatever medium. Yeah, in terms of nurturing it, for me, it's time. I mean, of course, in terms of those elements, right? I mean, it's observation and personal experience and imagination kind of all interacting with each other. But more than anything, it really comes down to being able to intentionally carve out a time and place or space for you to do this thing or consume this thing, or both. And I think, especially in our culture today, we live with either, and I don't know if it's an actual deficit of time, or if it's just a perceived, my hunch is it's more of a perceived deficit of time. But yeah, to somehow overcome that, and say, this is when I do this thing, and just see where it goes. You know, I mean, I'm lucky, right, as a theater maker, like, it's pretty easy, at least if I'm on the directing side, less so on the playwriting side. On the directing side, it's pretty built-in structure. Okay, rehearsal call is 7 o'clock tonight, we are here until 10:30. This is the time when we do this thing. We will do this for 4 weeks. At the end of it, we will have a product to show people. But, you know, in other medium, you know, I mean, in visual art, you have to be more disciplined about when you will sit down and do that, because it's not a sort of this communal endeavor where everyone has to come up to an agreed upon time of when they're available to do this thing. It's just, when am I going to sit down and do it? And that's hard. It's just hard.
I would say, when it comes to creativity, and what I believe is that the word creativity and idea are synonymous. And also, what I do in advertising is really work with human behavior. So you ask, like art and creativity, does that make us be human? I think it's a resounding yes. And to sort of, how do we make ourselves really think about ourselves as humanity to be more creative, to reach out, to make more experiences so that others can experience them and then go in turn and make their experiences. It's a domino effect. And that's how we learn about each other. And so, like Trey was saying, these past 3 years we've been in here, so why not make more experiences now that we can do that to be more out here and learn just a little bit more about each other. Yeah, for sure. Yes, sir.
I have an observation more than a question.
Sure.
It's been kind of thinking through. I relate much more to the guy in the middle than anybody else as a minister, as a pastor. But my son, who's an actor and a director and a producer, we've always joked that both of us live and die by the audience's perception, whether it's a congregation or it's the audience that watches what we do. But we both have words. Both you three all have a received text, but you treat that text entirely different, in the sense that you have a hard. This is what I'm saying. Is this a correct perception? You have a hard stop with the words that the playwright wrote. Your creativity comes behind those words. But you've got the words, and those are the words that you stick to. That's why I could never be an actor. I remember the words. Because what I've been trained to do is to take the received text and be creative in putting that into new words on the other side. But both you two, and Trey, or Steve and I, we want to be creative, but I've always struggled with when have I gone too far in creativity? Am I just being creative to be creative? Am I still being true to the text? Or am I just getting excited because this is becoming something brand new, nobody's ever heard before? Maybe it has nothing to do with the text. It's just my own thoughts.
Right.
And I guess, does that happen then to you all in your medium?
Yeah, it's
where your creativity with the way you stage it or whatever, it's just gone way off the rail from where
I've seen that play.
I mean, there's certainly a blurred boundary between creation and adaptation.
Okay.
And obviously, I mean, that's a pretty germane question, in regards to this particular play, since it is an adaptation of a text written in another medium. And I think that there is something about bringing a sort of two-dimensional text that exists on the page into the reality of a three-dimensional production that is creation, but there is also just something that is adaptation. That really is just moving it from something that is flat to something that is embodied. And I like that. I like to call it my trampoline. And even I've noticed when I write as a playwright, not necessarily that I'm creating adaptations, but all of my plays in one way or another somehow have an element of connecting to other texts or in relationship with other texts. because for me, I find it is very creatively fertile to have that springboard, this thing that I can build off of. I would be terrified to do what you do, which is to stare at a blank canvas. That is like some level of torture that I do not want to subject myself to. So, for me, I like working in that medium of, okay, I have something that gives me momentum. I don't have to turn on the car. The car's already running. I just have to figure out how to get it to change gears, how to hit the gas pedal and where I want to steer it. But I don't need to start the car. And in that way, it really is adaptation. And folks who are working in other ways, even within the realm of theater, might be working strictly from a realm of pure creation. I don't. I really don't. I find my mind doesn't work that way.
One, even more than the word create or creation, interpretation might be part of what's going on here. So, I start with the text. It's already been interpreted once, at least once, by the time I get to it. And then I'm offering my own interpretation of what these words, what the meaning is behind these words. And you start with a play, which in this case, for this play, has already been interpreted once, at least, from novel to play. And then you're putting it forth with its own interpretation. And then the actors are bringing in their own interpretations as well. And there's something about that word, interpretation, that is more cohesive and more grounded a little bit to the original, whatever the original thing is, I think. And again, you've got the blank canvas.
Yeah.
Because then people say,
Which I can
that's
still
just
connect
your
with.
interpretation.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and that's dismissive to say that. That's not a compliment when they say that.
And in the theater too, and maybe this has some overlap, in terms of the realm of clergy and how clergy treat text when speaking to a congregation. But like in the theater, there really is sort of a dividing line between two kinds of directors. Directors who can be thought of as text-based directors, directors who are known as auteur directors or experimental directors. But auteurs are just director as author. I have always been a text-based director. My bedrock is the text. I enjoy watching productions of, that have been helmed by auteur directors. But that's not how I work. And I do find it more fulfilling to be engaged, I guess, in this interpretive act. And directing is closer to interpretation than it is full-fledged creation for me. I don't know if you feel that way when you act or you bring a character to life.
For actors, what the rehearsal process is about is finding the need what within the given circumstances has called forth the need for those particular words. So you're backfilling, and the words are the end point, and making that believable. I needed those words and no others. So.
Sophia, any thoughts on that?
No, it's very interesting to hear all of your guys' perspectives, so I can, I did a little theater in high school, and it's gotta be so hard to step on stage, and it's almost like you're stepping into a different world, and you want the audience to feel that, and to, like you said, take it from adaptation to creativity. And there are ways that I connect with that too, especially when I'm doing realistic pieces or portraits where I have this photo and I don't want to just copy this photo. That to me is adaptation, or you're it's almost like you guys just taking text and spewing text. There's no creative process in that for me. I see that photo and I'm recreating that and almost immortalizing the personality behind that pet or that person or that home, that that lifetime home, and that's where the creative process starts for me.
So I see two worlds.
Yeah.
Text and visual.
Yeah.
Both probably get the same emotions out of you.
Right.
Only, they're kind of equal in that way. Like a
visual and then words. Fun fact about me, I used to hate theater. I would not go to it because I had a fear of it. I had a fear because when I walked into that room, I didn't know what was going to happen. And then I had my partner, who is a director and theater person through and through. So it was an interesting mix. But what I learned is that you have to be able to let those things happen. That's part of the creative process. And the more you kind of let go and listen to what is going on around you within a play or within a talk, that is when you open yourself up to those new experiences and what they're trying to say. And I can listen or I cannot, but really, as I'm going through that, I realize that a lot of work has been put into this, a lot of time has been put into this, some money's been put into this, you know, and so at least, you know, I can appreciate that project and that work and know that that heart is there. So we got time for one more question and then we'll close it out.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
And this may be one question that might apply most to Sophia and Trey and maybe Marshall as a playwright. Of when does that process or opportunity for your curiosity to shape the work, when does that end? When do you decide to put the painting out there and it's finished? And Ray, you may be able to think of some equivalent of that question beyond like the schedule of the performances and all.
That is a very hard question for me, especially with abstract pieces. You know, there've been so many times where I'm like, okay, it's done. And then I come back the next day, I'm like, yeah, just a little bit. I'm just gonna change this. I'm just gonna change this. I'm just gonna add this little color here. You know, I sometimes, it's a privilege to get to, you know, take a few days, step away from it, or even, you know, I don't know if you noticed, but last night, even when the play started, I was still painting a little back there. You know, there are times where I turn off the lights and I look at the painting, or I'll paint with the light over here, or with, you know, it faded a little bit because I want different perspective. I want to see it from different angles, to see if it's done and to find that finish line, really. But sometimes there isn't one. Sometimes, you know, just letting it be and trusting that you've done your work is the ultimate test. Where, you know, there's, especially like I said with the abstract, there's no finish line. You know, with my realistic pieces, I can tell when they're done because you can see a portrait there in front of you. You know, it's completely filled with pencil or it's completely filled with paint. It's got all the colors. You can see their nose, their eyes, everything. But yeah, it can be really difficult. I think that, like, you know, even like I said, in my day-to-day, my creative process in my mind it never shuts off, you know. But with the abstract, I think there's a really big amount of freedom in it and a freedom of expression, but it can be incredibly intimidating, especially like you guys said, when you're looking at a blank canvas and sometimes you're, where do I start and where do I finish?
I no longer watch football, but the only analogy I can think of is a football analogy, which is I'm ready to let it go when it's in the red zone. Like there probably are still a few yards that I will be able to find from this, and a few ways in which I can make small, minor improvements on the piece. But we're already in a place to score. Like, it's already there, and it's good enough that it can reach people that it's going to put some points on the board. And could I move it 3 yards further, 5 yards further?
Yeah.
Probably, and maybe I will before it gets seen by the world. But I'm okay to let it go when I know when I know we can get points on the board. That's kind of how I feel about it.
It's interesting, I asked Matthew last night, since you weren't here as the director, I said, did he take notes, you know, on the performance to give to the actors? He said, no, the director's work is done.
Oh, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done. It's stage
That was
manager
your
job.
thought.
I am.
That's right, you
I
don't do any more
am
once the play
done.
starts.
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah.
That's great.
I was trying to create more work for you.
Very briefly, for an actor, every time you step on the stage in a performance, it's a new world, and so as long as that's happening, you enter that world, and then when the run's over, you're done. And it's in some ways what Marshall was talking about in terms of structure of time. It's like, when am I done? I'm done when the show closes, because I can't enter that world again. So, boom.
I think of creations as being living things. And once they have life, once they've gotten to the point that where they seem to be living and doing their own thing on it, wherever that is, whatever that means, it's not that I'm necessarily done with it, but it's now it's alive. Now it's going to do its own thing, and that's a little different. So I mean, I had lesson plans, Bible study type things that I've created and come back to 10 years later, and been like, this, I still have something to give to this, and it wasn't like it was. I mean, I was kind of done with it, but then it came back because the text had something new to say to me. The life had something different to say. I did a Bible study on the Book of Lamentations that I'm really proud of, and I did it twice. And then the third time around, and so Lamentations, book of the Bible with a heavy emphasis on communal grief, and the idea that this whole community is suffering and is feeling that pain all at once together from the same place, and it's individuals have their own unique things going on, but there's something communally happening that's also very important. Well, the third time I taught it was right after COVID. We had a whole new example I'd been talking about 9/11 for a long time. My kids didn't know that anymore. But we had a brand new one that was going to inform the way that we contemplated what that really meant. And the thing I had created was definitely still living. And as a result, I was still not done with it. So.
It's funny how you think you're done, and then 10 years later it'll come up again. Yeah. Kind of like human beings, we're all just one big catch-all. All right, this concludes our panel. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to come to the show, and there will be a second panel. Trey, do you want to talk a little about second panel? What that's about?
No, I've still got to wrap my brain around things that happen a week from now.
Fair enough. Until next time, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.